In 1990, the Happy Mondays released their third studio album, Pills and Thrills and Bellyaches. It went to number 4 in the UK, it sold 400,000 copies here and was certified platinum. That year, the singles Step On and Kinky Afro both also hit number 5 in the UK singles chart, and the Happy Mondays went on to headline Glastonbury that year. That was also the year Paul McCartney told the NME that the Mondays reminded him of the Beatles in their Strawberry Fields phase. The following year, the band played in front of 30,000 people at Elland Road in Leeds, and also performed at Rock in Rio. But it was the next year, 1992, when the wheels finally started to come off the speeding Mondays bandwagon. It was time to start recording their 4th album, and the band had several options as to where they would do it.
So just before Christmas, we got asked for a meeting, where do you want to do the new album? So they offered us 3 choices. They said, and I remember them in the rehearsal room saying, Amsterdam, in Manchester, at Stock Aitken and Waltman's studio, or Barbados. And we all just went, Barbados. And Mark went, let's do it in Manchester. And we all, because obviously Amsterdam was out, of course, you imagine. Barbados, away from everyone, people coming visiting, so there'd be no distractions. And it was hot, getting away from miserable Manchester in January.
The Happy Mondays had already recorded 3 studio albums in exceptional circumstances, but the events surrounding the making of their 4th would ensure it went down in rock and roll legend. Tales of the chaos inflicted on the exotic location, the drug rampages, near-death episodes, unflinching mental instability, and dead-eyed depravity would be told through the ages. There were many problems surrounding the idea of the Happy Mondays going to Barbados. One of the bigger issues being, the band weren't actually ready to make the album, but they were under pressure from their record label to do so because Factory Records was in danger of going under.
We kind of got forced to do that album because it was a New Order were funding the label, and New Order had an album out, and we hadn't, so we were forced to. We only had about 6 songs demo. We weren't ready to record.
By winter 1991, rumours around town were that Factory's finances were fucked. Factory bosses knew that they needed product from their best-selling acts, New Order and Happy Mondays. Tony Wilson, owner of Factory Records, received assurances that the new recordings would not cost more than £150,000. The Happy Mondays album would actually end up costing £380,000. But the band not being ready and not having enough material to record yet wasn't the only problem. There was also a lot going wrong in the various relationships between different band members. One of the biggest being a dispute over pay percentages, and another occurring because very shortly before they were due to go to Barbados, Shaun Ryder fired guitarist Mark Day with no warning and no explanation.
I mean, we'd done Pills and Thrills, it was successful, and then everybody went just a bit mental. And I was in bed one day and I got a phone call. I don't know who it was, I can't remember, I'm not naming names, but just said, Moose, you're out of the band. And we're supposed to go to Barbados within 24 hours. So that doesn't help your self-confidence.
The band attempted to get in various different guitarists to replace Mark, but in the end, Gaz stepped in and got Mark back in the band.
And then I got told Mark had left and he'd been fired. I can't remember the reason. I had to phone the others and say, come on. But I got him back in the band, yeah.
But the financial pressure from the record company, the band not being ready, and the band relationships falling apart still weren't it. Because frontman Shaun Ryder was seriously not in a good way at this point either. Dancer Bez says, by this time Shaun had really got himself a dirty, filthy habit with the smack, which wasn't going to help matters in the slightest. Shaun's habits and his awkward ways had been grinding away at the rest of the band over a long period of time by now, and they could have done with a serious break from it all too.
The band had become like, Shaun would come in at a different time, we were writing the music separate, then he'd come in and do it later with the programmer. It was all getting the usual stuff that happens with bands.
Christmas 1991 was rancid and bitter for the band. Shaun never came to rehearsals. Worse, he would send along various hopefuls he'd met as he went about feeding his habit. Some random bloke would turn up and say, Shaun said to come down, I play a bit of guitar and I sing. I'm here to help you write some songs. Paul Ryder, so long the band's driving force, was drifting away into deep heroin addiction, and Factory had announced that the band's new album would be released in 6 months' time. And so, with location decided and tickets booked, everyone rolled up to Manchester Airport on the big day. The band met at Manchester Airport to fly to Barbados the day after guitarist Mark Day had been reinstated.
So within 24 hours, Nathan rang me up and said, I'm back in the band, no apologies or anything, so I had to meet at the airport. So that was a bit awkward, not much said, as communications in the days weren't great, nobody talked about much, it's just you're in your own little shell.
The only thing I remember was speaking with Eric and getting Mark back in the band. I remember the day they got to the airport, Mark Hutchins said, I owe you a drink, thanks for doing that. I said, do you want me more than a drink, Mark?
Despite the poor state of relationships between the band members, there was still understandable excitement about flying out to Barbados to record. The Mondays would be joined by their partners and children, and the sunshine would bring out the best in the band. Manchester Airport, early in the morning, we were all clustered around the small mountain of pushchairs and suitcases. Then Sean arrived, late as usual. He had been bumming around all morning, trying to sort out his medicine. Now,
Sean had a bit of a problem with you-know-what, and he got a substitute methadone thing, and he was in the airport and he dropped it on the floor, refused to go. So I thought, it's going to get worse and worse, this trip to Barbados. It's not going to get any better. Sean Ryder turned up with 3,000 milligrams of quality methadone, the junkie's legal equivalent to smack. Methadone is intended to lure the addict slowly out of the depths of addiction, but is used more often than not as a straight substitute.
We got there and he fell out on the floor and just smashed everywhere. And I remember it, and everyone was like, oh shit. And he was like getting picked up as much as he can and all that. And it was like, oh Christ, no, that's not a good sign. We ran downstairs to where they sold little bottles of water, emptied the water out, and tried putting the methadone in this little water bottle, said Paul, who had his own small stash. There were pieces of glass in it and all sorts of stuff. Sean didn't want to fly, but was reassured that they would get something sorted when they reached Barbados. I mean, there was even talk of him not coming that day, and staying behind, which probably would have been a good idea, That's what should have happened.
Yeah, because then potentially he wouldn't have found someone else worse to replace it.
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't think it made much difference, probably.
And so, with tempers strained in the band, and with frontman Sean Ryder only having enough methadone to last him one day, everyone got on the plane and set off for Barbados. They arrived on the island in the middle of the night and in the midst of a torrential downpour. Sean was already experiencing withdrawal after the 13-hour flight. They were tired and no one could look anyone else in the eye. There was a sense of great trepidation, fear almost. Mark Day began to cry. He'd been sacked and reinstated, and the emotions he'd bottled up for close to 2 years, the abuse he'd felt, chiefly at the hands of Sean, came spilling out.
So I was going into Meltdown, obviously. So by the time we got to Barbados, it was, and Manchester's always raining. Well, this was proper rain. This was like torrential rain. Middle of the night, you dumped off in some private villa somewhere on a beach somewhere. I couldn't even tell where it was. And I just went into Meltdown, so I just lost it. Just totally lost it.
Now, you might at this point wonder why on earth a record company with financial issues would pay to send the whole band with their friends and families off to Barbados. Was that really a sensible use of their little remaining money? Well, it turns out that there was some logic behind it. The thinking was well-intentioned, but it was flawed. Factory Records claimed it was because of the island's reputation for being heroin-free, a place where Ryder could chill out, get out of the addiction, and get down to business. What a fucking laugh that was, states label owner Tony Wilson. True, there was no heroin on the island, but what we didn't know was that it was a fucking crack island. The worst place on earth to send Sean.
And then I woke up in the morning, sun was shining, I was on the beach in Barbados, it was gorgeous. I thought, oh, this is all right. Looking forward to this. Walked outside. I've got my own beach, villa on the beach, on my own, brilliant, bit of space, sort my head out. I'm walking down, there's this 6-foot rasta there talking to Sean. What's he up to? obviously. So, and I thought, we're fucked. Simple as that, we're fucked.
Bez picks up the story. The first night there, we were all pretty calm, due to the fact that we'd taken a small amount of Percy to smoke. On the second day, advantage was taken of the momentary lull in proceedings to go and explore the immediate surroundings, with a view to securing a source of supplies for the forthcoming 9 weeks. And it wasn't long before we were approached by certain entrepreneurs from these establishments offering their wares down on the beach. And Sean says the plan backfired because the one thing that no one at Factory had realised was that in Barbados you could buy an ounce of crack for £1. It was too late to save the Mondays. The band had been unable to locate any methadone on the island, Paul's supply had run out, and he had started to experience severe stomach cramps, the stress-related pains he'd been experiencing since his marriage breakdown, exacerbated by heroin withdrawal. He felt seriously ill.
And obviously when you get there, the studio, the drum and bass go in the first week, especially the drums. So the first week I was in the studio all week. Paul had come down with this mysterious illness, stomach pains, but went to hospital, couldn't find anything. We know later he was coming down off heroin. I know he'd taken it once or twice in Manchester, but I didn't think he had a habit. I caught him once in the rehearsal room and just called him a dick. He always remembers me going, "You dick." We didn't know Paul had a habit at the same time then. Once he's 2 in the band with heroin problems, it's over. No.
Sean was in some kind of hell. Once he'd drunk the small amount of methadone he'd managed to rescue from the airport disaster, he was in all sorts of pain. A doctor was found who put Sean on a heavy antipsychotic, which rendered Sean incapable of working. He tried doing one vocal and then stopped and said, "I can't do it." And so, during the first week, the instrumentalists, minus Paul, who was hospitalised, began working on writing and recording tracks, completely naked.
It was absolutely boiling hot, no air conditioning in the studio, so I remember recording naked. I remember I was naked. I think Mark was in his underpants, and Paul Ryder might have been naked when we was recording. It was boiling hot. And then we had a guy called Bruce from New York, who was a Latin percussionist, and I think he was naked as well, which is dangerous with percussion, isn't it?
It got to a point where it just embarrassing sometimes, because, when Tina had to lift a piece of paper up to tell us to change to the next bit. It was like, nobody could count anymore. Counting to 4 was out of the question. What's 4? He gets about 3. Now, you daft bastard. I got my bits done in 2 weeks because Jane, my wife, was coming over in 2 weeks, so I wanted to get that out of the way. Luckily, I was left alone, got on with it, and then it just went chaos. It just got worse and worse because everybody's hanging about and they get bored.
Because the Mondays went to Barbados with half the album unwritten, many of them were actually written in the studio. But only the music, not the vocals, because by this time a drug-addled Sean was starting to go to a very dark, paranoid place. Some of his paranoia, however, apparently was founded in reality, because while the band weren't trying to do so, producers Tina and Chris were actually trying to get him out of the band.
Chris and Tina from Talketter were producing it, kept having meetings with us, with the management, with the label, with everyone. And all they kept saying was, replace the singer. It's not going to change. Replace the singer. So obviously Sean heard about that. I still think to this day, Sean still thinks it was probably us. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he knows the truth now, but I don't know. That's the problem with bands. Politics and people in people's ears, it causes. And obviously, taking extortionate amounts of drugs doesn't help.
The tensions between Sean and pretty much everyone else weren't the only problems in the first week, however. Notoriously volatile keyboard player PD was also involved in an altercation with a local calypso band. Gaz and PD had been drinking on the plane and carried on consuming the local rum at the luxury complex Sam Lord's Castle, where most of the band were booked to stay.
So we started at the airport, and the flight's 14 hours or something. We drank for 14 hours. We arrived there, they got greeted with rum punch. We did that, and then we checked into a place called Sam Lord's Castle.
There was a cabaret-style calypso band on called Spice, who were playing at the complex, and Davis took a dislike to them.
Drinking all day. There's a band on called Spice. They were on till 1 a.m. We just sat there drinking till 1 a.m. Then PD, the keyboard player, we found out got arrested because he threatened one of the band and got into a. He grabbed one of the keyboard player by the throat. He played some. I think he'd done a Beatles song, Cabaret style, really badly, and it annoyed him. PD's he's his own. He's in his own planet constant. He's in his own universe. PD. He's on. It's hard to kind of explain. We only lasted there a week, and we all got kicked out.
Were you there when Paul Davis attacked Spice, the Calypso band?
No, because I didn't try and get involved in. We're going out down to the main town. I thought, oh, here we go. And I thought, if they're going out, it's going to be fucking carnage, and nobody's going to fucking end up getting lost or stuck in a sugar cane or crash or fucking whatever. I just thought, no. But I've been in situations where I've been with Paul Davis, and it's not funny. Well, it is now. It wasn't there. You think, oh fuck, do I run?
The band and producers continually tried to bring Sean around and get him involved, but by the end of the first week, he was just too far gone. He says, by the 5th or 6th day, the music was just not happening for me, so me and Bez were like, let's just go and get some stone. Within a week, I was more interested in smoking crack than going in the studio. I just couldn't write lyrics to it, and the nightmare just progressed.
Never saw Sean because when he turned up, I'd disappear because obviously he didn't like me, obviously, because he tried to sack me. So it's like, so I was never there when he was doing, anything. I just fucked off. I'd had enough. It can get a bit much, and we'd been together probably, don't know, since 85. So, when you're with people more than you see your girlfriend, wife, it can get a bit.
The producers spent days and nights playing Sean the music, but nothing came. No lyrics, no inspiration. Which is probably unsurprising, bearing in mind he was on a cocktail of antipsychotics and crack cocaine. His head was scrambled. While the others settled into some sort of calm, his rambling descent picked up pace. All he cared about was the crack pipe. He was, said Bez, way beyond reasoning. Even Bez could not stand being in his company for any minute longer than he had to. When he was not sleeping, he was scouring the island for drugs. While the band waited by their instruments in the studio, Sean was locked in the toilet for 20 hours a day, smoking rocks, a lost cause. And when the band's oversight tried to rearrange things to reduce Sean Ryder's access to the drugs, he improvised.
But as each day went past the studio, I started noticing people dressed like people from Manchester, and I'm like, that's really weird. Where are they getting those clothes from? Where are they getting? And seriously, like proper, everything but the haircuts and everything. And they're just thinking, where are they getting them clothes? That's really weird. Can you get them clothes here? We didn't drop, you know what I mean?
Chris and Tina moved me to a house on the other side of the island at one stage, left me there to try and write lyrics and make sure I had no money to buy crack with. But I still had my clothes, so I just swapped a pair of Armani jeans and some Hugo Boss t-shirts for some rock. Of course, the next thing, someone spotted one of the locals wearing all my gear walking along the beach.
My chest set got pinched, which really pissed me off. This Caspian chess things that you play. That went for crack. Things were disappearing for crack, and it really used to get on my nerves. And I got me back up. Why are you nicking my chest set for fucking drugs? Where's this gone? I
took a break. I've told you story before, but I took a break about 3 days in, and I went out of the studio, and you're up onto the next level. There's a swimming pool that overlooked this wasteland, because like I say, it was on the Atlantic side. They built a crack den out of the sun loungers. There's just smoke coming out. And the paradox of this beautiful place, there's this sun lounges and all this smoke coming out. And I'm like, oh. But I just thought once they start work, once it gets to, they will stop.
And as you might expect, by this time the tales of the chaos and insanity had got back to England. Label boss Tony Wilson said, I heard reports. I kept getting bizarre messages. The fact is, Factory was teetering on the brink, and our only chance to escape seemed to lie in the hands of this crazy bunch of useless fucks who were speeding around Barbados, crashing into fucking trees. Within the first 7 days, there were 3 major car smashes. Which is true, and not even half of the picture. Bez had one of the worst car crashes on the island, and he tells the story like this. I managed to get myself sorted out with a Vitari Jeep on about the 4th day, and spent a few hours doing handbrake turns around fields and the garden by the studio, happy as a pig in shit. Coming back from a local shanty bar one afternoon, I remembered there was a bit of bumpy road, and as I ripped down the last mile of dirt track, I hit it full on, doing about 50 miles an hour and still accelerating. I fucking took off, doing somersaults in the air, and landed upside down facing the way I'd just been coming from. But first I just hung there in my seat thinking, fucking hell, I can't believe I got away with that one. But then I noticed that my arm was swinging above my head at a funny angle. I didn't have any pain, just a mad rush of adrenaline coursing through my body. The only option was to try to escape, Houdini style. After wriggling free of the twisted wreckage, I then realised I'd have to walk the rest of the way up to the studio. There was nothing for it but to grit my teeth, put my head down, and plod on. A lifetime passed before the familiar surroundings of the studio swam into view. I felt like the Walking Dead, stumbling up the garden. Paul Ryder says he knocked on the studio door with his arm hanging off. He was white, pure pale white. Tina came out and tried to help him. His eyes were rolling into the back of his head. Bez was hospitalised and feared he would lose his arm. Specialists on the island advised him to return to the UK, but he refused, and so was instead given a powerful painkiller, pethidine.
From the swimming pool, he looked over this wasteland, and he'd gone off-road on the wasteland, and they're not really built for that. And from the pool, you could see that he was still there, but I left his Jeep upside down. They couldn't get it, could rescue it. But he snapped it in a bad way. I mean, he was in hospital for the rest of the time we were there until the last week.
This is when all the mayhem was happening, when I was in the studio recording, because they've got nothing to do. They go out and entertain themselves. All I knew when he came back and he was plastered up and he was in a bit of a bad way, and then he just took more drugs. So, you know, to get rid of the pain. It's an ongoing process, isn't it?
But shortly after, he would re-break the arm in a kind of speedboating accident.
And he'd come out of hospital bed, and a guy come up on, you know, them things have on the back of boats or jet skis, like a banana or something. You sit on them and they go really fast. Does anybody want to go on that? We're like, no. Bez goes, I'll have a go. And he's got all this. You can't go on. You've got spikes at you, you know. Plus, I'll have a go. So we couldn't talk him out of it because it's Bez. You can't. So he goes on it. So we said to the guy. So me and Paul said to the guy, just go really slow. He's got this arm. He's just come out of hospital. Just go really, really slow. As he took off, all we heard Bez shout was, as fast as you can, mate. Come off, and he snaps again. And they come in and they have to take him to the hospital again.
But back to the subject of car crashes, Bez wasn't the only one to wreck a vehicle. Keyboard player Paul Davis, who celebrated his 26th birthday in Barbados, had only just learned to drive and wrote off 3 hire cars. It was common to see the band's cars upturned at roadworks where they went to score crack. One night, Gaz, who stayed off the crack, was in a bar drinking rum and having a spliff when a car ploughed straight through the front of the bar.
And I was drinking, it was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and we told everyone we're going to be in this bar, and all of a sudden we just heard this noise of brakes, and this car come to park, but it didn't stop in time. It kind of pushed the wall, it was a wooden, only wooden, pushed the wall out, and the bonnet of this car just came into the bar. And it was PD and Sean in the car, I can't remember who was driving, and they came in, they went, oh, sorry mate, about how much did it cost? And it was something like, the charge was 500 quid, it was probably cost about 20 quid to repair.
It was just chaos. Murder, mystery, and fucking mayhem, all rolled in one.
I did lose a car. I lost a car. I didn't know what a Mini Mocha parked in. I thought it had been robbed, and I was convinced. I told the hire car company it had been stolen, and but we found it at a restaurant I'd been to. That's the herb, the weed. I completely forgot. We come out and it's been stolen. And then we got attacked, and yeah, they found it. They went, where was your last? I said, at this restaurant, and they went, and he was there. So I lost the car, but I didn't trash any. I'm a good boy. We all knew it was coming to an end, so I think everyone was just going for it, you know. And my girlfriend, now my wife, came over, and we just rented a house in the middle of nowhere, away from everything, and just coming each day to check. And each day we got back, there was more derelict cars side of the road. I think we seriously went through about 12 or 13. There was only one hire car company, and they had something like 20 odd cars, and they said, you've taken half the cars, we can't, you know.
And of course, Hands down, Sean was the worst by a mile for wrecking vehicles. Bez says, one night we'd been at it until the wee small hours when Sean took it upon himself to go off and get in fresh supplies. A few hours had passed by when bass player Paul appeared by the pool looking for some action himself. We thought it best to drive over to where we knew Sean was holed up, some notorious crack den at the 6 Crossroads. On the way up there, we spotted Sean's car upside down in the middle of the road and got out to make a closer inspection of the wreckage. Yet another car bites the dust. Shit happens. Sean was nowhere to be seen, but the bonnet was open and the battery had been taken out. Surveying the scene further, we realised that he'd hit a big bump in the road, ran up a steep embankment, and the car had toppled over. He'd struggled the rest of the way over to his new mate's house to swap the battery for rock. We got there to find Sean battered from the accident, his nose all over the place and cuts all over his head, but happily smoking away. And Sean explains the car battery thing. The other thing I found you could use as currency out there was car batteries. A lot of the locals lived in shacks or huts without mains electricity, so they would run everything off car batteries, their lights and whatever they used to cook with and so on. You could get a nice bit of rock for a car battery. Every time I wrote off a car, I would take the battery out and swap it for crack. I think me and Bez wrote off the rental company's entire fleet of cars. They didn't have any left. We had written off every last one of them. And, after Sean had written off all those cars, he then went on to write off Gaz's car.
Because Sean had written off a few things and got into trouble, they asked if he could come and stay with us. We had a spare room for a couple of nights, so he said, yeah. We didn't want him to, but obviously, to try and save the album. And the first night, I'm in bed and hear the car going. I said, sure, I've heard the car. I've left the keys in the front room. And then I heard Sean say, it's all right, Ronnie, if I borrow your car, isn't it? I went, oh, yeah, I was asleep. Next week, we get a knock on the door, and he comes in, face full of blood. He said, sorry, guys, sorry, I've written the car off. That's all I can remember. I remember middle of the night, but he had a face full of blood. So I don't know what had happened, but he had a big bump, and literally, middle of the night, waking up, and his face covered in blood.
Bez says, by this time, we'd spent every penny we had on crack, and Sean thought it a good idea to get on the phone home, holding the part finish tapes in one hand and the receiver in the other, threatening to destroy the lot if more dough wasn't wired over for us immediately. It was plainly obvious to everyone by now that the plot had seriously gone sideways. Stories had been flying back about all the happenings, and everyone at factory was panicking. To say things were getting completely out of hand has to be the understatement of the century. Sean was now totally and utterly right off his fucking box, and way beyond any reasoning.
The engineer went on strike because factory was going under. It was just got worse. Every day there was something new, and I thought, we're fucked. Fuck it.
The last place we stayed, I can't remember the name of the place, there was Dutch lesbians below. We were upstairs and we had like 5 bedrooms with a veranda. And me and my girlfriend had gone the last 4 days there, and they had a barbecue outside, and something caught fire. So everyone was trying to hide the weed because the police and the firemen were coming. But me and my girlfriend had a massive argument, and we were in the bedroom, and we were throwing clothes. I was throwing her clothes, she was throwing my clothes out the bedroom window, and the police all came up. So everyone's trying to hide the weed. Bez has got a spliff in one arm up, like, in shorts. There's a barbecue there. There's these 2 Dutch 65-year-old lesbians who screaming at us in Dutch or broken English, and me and my girlfriend are throwing things out the window. And then they turn up, and I was like, fucking, we just wanted accidents. It was pure accidents. Like I say, chaos just happened from everywhere. It just happened to us, but all purely organic.
Bez was crashing shit. Sean was nicking shit. Houses were destroyed. Hospital bills were going up. Like being in a band, you've got to learn all sorts of skills, how to deal with addicts, how to deal with psychosis, memory loss, lies, cheats, money laundering, becoming a criminal, working out how to nick things without getting caught, falling out of a van, just smoke everywhere, smoking drugs on planes, coke on planes, fucking smuggling drugs around the world, in your guitar case. It doesn't make me feel secure in life anymore.
Sean says, there were quite a few shootings while we were there as well. I remember needing to score one night and waiting until we heard the gunfire stop before we could go out. We saw a gun battle one day, some sort of drive-by where a cop was shot. I didn't think about how dangerous it was at the time because all I was thinking about was the drugs.
The studio was Eddie Grant's. It was a fine studio accommodation. Eddie Grant's nephew, there was this young rasta, he was only about 20, and he was like the tape op in the studio, so to speak. And he was like Eddie's nephew, and he was cleaned up, because Eddie wasn't there when we were there, luckily. So we got in the studio, and he was like, "Oh, there's no smoking in the studio," and we went, "Fuck off, no, we're smoking." And by the end of it, he was, and apparently a week later, Eddie'd come back and gone to the studio with his nephew. His nephew lit a cigar, a spliff up, and Eddie fired him on the spot.
Once the recording holiday was over, the band returned to the UK. Sean went into rehab to try and get into some kind of fit state to write and record his vocals. But really, the Barbados trip was not really a recording trip. In a way, it was more of a goodbye. It was, according to Gaz, one last mad blowout before the arrival of what they all inevitably knew was just around the corner.
It was complete separate. We knew it was ending. And I think it was just like, let's have a party in Barbados for a month while we can.
Right, so there was a real sense then that this was the last chapter, this is the big blowout, let's just go mad in Barbados, let's get it done, and then we are done.
Exactly, it was falling apart before we went there.
I'm glad I did it. I could have turned around and said, "No, I'm not doing it with you nutters anymore, you've done me head in," but I had to go. I thought, this might be the last stab for me. I knew my card was fucking numbered.
I don't remember the flight home, I don't remember coming home, I don't remember when we left, I don't remember that. But no, we were told they weren't going to stamp our passports, but we were not allowed to come back to ever go back to the country.
Barbados was just fucking mayhem. Try and blank it out of my mind. I do wake up in a hot flush sometimes thinking, did that really happen?
When the album Yes Please came out, the band loved it, Sean hated it, but the band did come to an end shortly after, along with Factory Records. But not before the Happy Mondays had written themselves into insane rock and roll legend, with Keith Moon-esque levels of insanity to a level that no other band of the 90s, even those much more famous than the Mondays, would ever really be able to compete with.
It's everyone in the band's favourite album. It's my favourite album. I think it kind of sums up what we're really about. There's a song on there called Angel, which is my favourite. I think it's the best. Sums up my drums, sums up Paul's bass, sums up Mark's guitar, Sean's lyrics, Rowetta's vocals, PD's keyboards. Sean was always against using Chris and Tina as producers, so I think he was never going to like it.
But I'm proud of it. I still think it's a great album. I don't know about the title, though. Yes, please. It was always open to no thanks, you know what I mean? Stupid name, but there you go.
So I'm smiling when I think about it. I've never thought about it, but when I think about it, I smile.
But yeah, thank you. It's been very interesting. You've dug up some memories that I thought I'd buried.
Well, mate, great to talk to you. Great to meet you.
Yeah, you too, James. Thank you very much.
No, I had a good time there. You know, Herb and Son, what's not to like, you know. I had a good time.
If you would be interested in also watching the full-length interviews with Gaz and Mark from the Mondays, they are both available on my Patreon for supporters. The link is down in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time. And as always, a massive thank you to all my supporters on Patreon. If you would like access to bonus content, as well as extended cuts and access to my ad-free archive, the link is in the description, and hopefully I'll see you inside.